So, some of you might remember that in the late 2000s, Twilight mania dominated pop culture. A lot of books, shows, and movies came out that were trying to capitalize on the supernatural teen romance trend. All monsters were fair game, but the gutsiest production teams just also did vampires. The first Twilight film hit theaters in 2008, and The Vampire Diaries aired on the CW in 2009. Like Twilight, The Vampire Diaries is based on a book series, this one written by L.J. Smith. But the books are not actually derivative of Twilight, they came out like a decade before. Any similarities you might notice are just a coincidence, or they stem from the fact that this is a genre, and genres have tropes. My first experience with The Vampire Diaries is that my friend Bailey put it on when I was sick with a 103-degree fever and kind of delirious, and she was keeping me company, and she knew this would be the only way to get me to start watching this show. It turns out with Vampire Diaries, it doesn't matter if you're delirious, you're still going to have a consistent viewing experience. So anyway, after this, we subsequently spent an entire summer binging the whole rest of the show. I say the whole show, but I actually mean around 4 seasons, and there are 8. It felt really long, but yeah, we only made it about halfway before we decided it became too bad to continue. But for the purposes of this video, I have caught up. I am a Vampire Diaries expert. I just want to give like a flyover view of the experience. It's like a travelogue, but a show. The good, the stupid, just those 2 things. So this vid is intended for people who haven't seen Vampire Diaries and people who have alike. And since this is YouTube, I have organized my thoughts into a numbered list. And before we proceed, I just need to lay it out there that my shorthand name for the series is VPD. The real acronym is TVD. The Vampire Diaries, but I call it VPD, Vampire Diaries. And you're just gonna have to make your peace with that. Okay, here we go. Part 1, the love triangle. I was going to do a section called like the story or the premise. And then when I was writing this out, I realized that the love triangle just is that. Twilight had Team Edward and Team Jacob, and the Vampire Diaries had Team Edward. No, The Vampire Diaries had Team Stefan and Team Damon. Again, this similarity is a coincidence. Love triangles are very popular in the YA genre. Unlike in Twilight, both of Elena's options are vampires. They're also brothers, which I think is a pretty okay idea. I hate love triangles as a plot device, but usually the 2 men in the love triangle are just adversaries. So the idea of having them be brothers and having a relationship with each other too, I think makes it a lot more interesting. At the beginning of the series, Damon and Stefan are just total enemies, but as it goes on, it becomes clear that they actually really love each other. They're bronemies. It just sounds like bronies. So love interest number 1 is Stefan. They obviously cast and styled the actor to be reminiscent of Robert Pattinson in Twilight. Just look at his hair and his big rectangular head.
How old are you?
17.
How long have you been 17?
Wait, how long have you...
I've been 17 years old since 1864.
Stefan is the good boy vampire. He's also extremely boring. Just a handsome brick of styrofoam. The most nuance they give him is making him a vampire allegory for alcoholism. Like Edward Cullen, Stefan only drinks animal blood, but we find out the reason he does that is because he cannot drink human blood in moderation. Most vampires can, but Stefan can't. And if he has even a little bit of it, he goes all jittery and starts craving it, which since he's a vampire, leads to him murdering people.
You don't get it. I can't stop, Elena. I'm a ripper. A ripper doesn't stop. And when that clock ticks down, I'm going to have to feed on you.
I thought this was a pretty cool idea. Obviously, if you're looking at the alcoholism parallel, the fact that it makes him a crazed murderer is a little insensitive, but it is an allegory. It's not supposed to be 1-1. Also in Twilight, it's portrayed as very noble that the Cullens only drink animal blood, but for the newer vampires in their family, they also steal blood bags from the hospital, and that's portrayed as like totally cool for them to do. Yeah, guys, I'm sure they weren't using that for anything. Stefan drinks animal blood for a reason that not only makes sense, but also adds something to his character. Also, he robs the local blood bank when he's struggling with his addiction, and it's portrayed as like a really bad thing and a huge red flag.
He has a fridge full of stolen blood bank contraband in the house.
Oh my god.
Anyway, I said this was the most interesting thing they did with Stefan, so it's important to note that in later seasons, they just completely forgot about it. You even see him drinking human blood from the blood bank like it's no big deal. Love interest number 2 is Damon. He is obviously the bad boy alternative. He gets more interesting storylines and quippy one-liners. I think the actor they got for him is really good too. I mean, after enough episodes, you start to notice that he has one face he makes to punctuate every single one-liner. I can't think of a way to describe it other than Damon's eyebrow face. A very eyebrow-heavy performance, but I appreciate that he reads his lines in a way other than the most obvious way to read them every single time, which is honestly a rarity in CW acting. In later seasons, he actually starts to go way too far with it, like some of his line reads are just straight up cuckoo.
Doesn't sound crazy. It is crazy.
Stop defending me!
The guy's a werewolf. He killed me the first chance he got.
If you were a racer, you'd know what I'm talking about, but you're not.
Oh, also, I'm pretty sure this guy was somebody in Lost, so I'm sure a lot of you were very angry that I just called him the actor they got to play Damon, but I didn't watch Lost, so you'll have to take me to court over that one. Anyway, Damon was the obvious fan favorite, and you could also tell by the way he was written that he was the writer's favorite. Let's just put a pin in that. Oh, it's a bulletin board. I can literally do that. I just dropped one and I can't find it. So that'll be fun later. Our heroine, Elena, is a high school sophomore, I think. They all look comically too old to be the ages they play.
I've got my ring. I could get in, get out. No spells necessary.
Gee, thanks, you 16-year-old child.
It's not fair. He's 16 years old. He shouldn't have to live like this.
I'm the kid, Mom. You're supposed to be responsible for me.
Which only gets funnier when characters are vampires and theoretically frozen in age while their actors keep getting even older. Like, Damon is supposed to be 25 for the entire run of the show, and the actor is already too old when they cast him, and then he's pushing 40 when the series ends. So you look at Damon in season 8 and you're supposed to buy that this man was admitted into a high school dance. Anyway, Elena lives in Mystic Falls, Virginia, which has a history of supernatural activity. The vampire brothers are both in love with Elena because she looks identical to Catherine, the sexy evil lady who turned them both into vampires in the first place. I feel like we see this so often with vampires, where like if they love any modern woman, it's because she looks identical to a previous love that they had. I think that's so lame. Like I understand that people have a type, but that is taking it way too far. I think the reason we see it so much is that it's really good writing shorthand to not have to think of a reason that they love this person. So that's basically the premise of the show. These two vampires want to date Elena, and then every season a new supernatural threat comes to town, or I should say every half season they tend to break it up into shorter arcs, which honestly I like and am a fan of because it forces the show to move really fast and not waste time. So they'll bring in witches, werewolves, other vampires, just kind of whatever they decide exists that season. Number 2, the supporting cast. Elena has two best friends, Caroline and Bonnie. Well, it's kind of written like Caroline is the superficial cheer captain / acquaintance, and Bonnie is Elena's real best friend.
See you guys later.
Okay. Bye. No comment.
At the beginning, they hang out with Caroline as like a group, but privately both of them seem to find her kind of annoying. Especially in the early episodes, we see that Bonnie is the one that Elena actually confides in. But Caroline is later turned into a vampire, which makes her much more involved in the central storylines. And Bonnie is employed as a very utilitarian character. She's a very powerful witch.
I predict this year is going to be kick-ass. And I predict all the sad and dark times are over and you are going to be beyond happy.
Please don't leave me. I don't want to be. I can't. I'm so sick of crying. No, I can't. I can't. No!
Whenever the plot needs to move along, they'll just write in some new ability that Bonnie has. But then consequently, I feel like we see a lot more of her doing spells than having any kind of inner world. We're gonna go ahead and put a big pin in the character of Bonnie. Their group includes Matt, Elena's ex-boyfriend, now friend, who is mostly interesting because he stays a human for the whole series, which is quite a feat. Personality-wise, Matt is kind of like Kristoff from Frozen. Like, he's nice. And that's it. Elena's parents are already dead when the series starts because if your protagonist is a teenager and you want them to go have adventures, it's just a lot easier if their parents are dead. If you watch, you'll notice that a lot of these kids get orphaned over the course of the series.
So handsome.
Thanks. You look pretty good too, Mom.
Oh, a compliment. I think I'll fall over.
Anyway, Elena has a little brother named Jeremy, and their legal guardian is Jenna, the cool aunt. Jenna's supposed to be a grad student, so she's meant to be young, but her actress is literally only 2 years older than Elena's, which is a little extreme. Then we have Alaric Saltzman, who is the school history teacher, vampire hunter, and when he joins their squad, he's kind of the team surrogate dad. And when the cast grows up and goes to college, he follows them and becomes a college professor a la Mr. Feeney. Not to reveal how old I am by referencing Mr. Feeney. I mainly wanted to mention Alaric because his name is so funny. Like, they wait several episodes to reveal he's a vampire hunter, as if we're just going to think there's nothing up with the new guy in town named Alaric Saltzman. And that's it. I'm realizing now that this is a very short section. The reason it's a short section is there's a point later on the list called Characters I Hate, and a whole lot of people are there. Number 3, the lore. When you're dealing with supernatural creatures, you have to establish how your universe of choice works. Lots of universes have covered vampires, witches, werewolves, but they tend to work in different ways. The first season of the show is pretty good about explaining its rules. Vampires are super fast and super strong and can compel people, which is basically mind control. They can look in your eyes and make you do things, or command you to forget they drank your blood. If a vampire feeds you their blood, it can accelerate healing. In the first season, Damon has this ability to make Halloween fog machines start blowing all over the place, and a spooky crow appears to herald his arrival.
Crow's a bit much, don't you think?
Wait do you see what I can do with the fog?
This is never explained, ends a few episodes in, and never returns. The spooky crow is all over the pilot. I miss that guy. I guess they didn't renew his contract between seasons. Maybe he had a falling out with a castmate. To kill a vampire, you have to drive a wooden stake through their heart, or ripping out their heart, decapitating them, or lighting them on fire would work too. And if they go in the sun, they will light on fire themselves. More on that later. These vampires have to be invited into houses, which I love. That's such an underrated classic vampire rule. And when vampire stories write it out, you know they're taking themselves too seriously. They do some funny stuff with it too, like this newly turned vampire can't get into his own house.
And next thing I know, I can't get into my house because my foot won't go through the door.
You have to be invited in.
I know. I live alone.
Oh, that sucks.
And this one vampire is dragged into a house while knocked out, then wakes up and hasn't been invited in, so it's like he starts suffocating. The last notable weakness is the herb vervain. Touching it burns them. Injecting it works basically like a tranquilizer dart.
You can put it in jewelry, or you can even put it in food or drink, but as long as it's in you or on you, a vampire cannot control you.
Wow, so much to remember.
You know.
But my favorite quality about vervain is that if you trick a vampire into drinking it, they'll do a comedy spit take. For the record, vervain is the same thing as verbena. So if any of these late 2000s teens in the show are Bath & Body Works shoppers and their lotion of choice is coconut lime verbena, they're basically invincible. Unfortunately, in modern times, coconut lime verbena has been discontinued, so we're all gonna die, and it's Bath & Body Works' fault. To turn someone into a vampire, you feed them vampire blood and then kill them while it's still in their system, and then they have to feed on human blood themselves. This kind of doesn't make any sense. I already said that vampire blood can heal you. I need a drink of blood. So we often see our human characters getting shot and stabbed and brought to death's door, and then a good vampire gives them their blood and they're fine. But then the most common way we'll see people get turned into vampires is they'll drink vampire blood and then get their neck snapped. So where does vampire blood magic draw the line between what injuries it can heal and what injuries it will turn you into a vampire from dying of? There's this really confusing story beat where Jeremy wants to become a vampire, so he drinks vampire blood and then takes a bunch of pills. But it doesn't work, and Stefan says it's because the vampire blood healed the poisoning from the pills as it was happening.
What about the pills that he took?
He didn't take enough to die, so Anna's blood actually healed him of that.
But if it can heal an overdose or a serious abdominal wound, why can't it heal a broken neck or drowning? Oh, speaking of blood, vampires drink it. They can live on animal blood, but it has disadvantages. Damon explains that drinking human blood is what gives vampires their supernatural powers. So by drinking animal blood, Stefan is weaker physically, and also if he tries to compel people, it's like very hit or miss. If vampires don't drink any blood at all, it won't actually kill them. They'll just grow steadily weaker, and finally their body will start to desiccate, and they'll stay in kind of a stasis as a mummified corpse until they're fed blood again. So it's kind of like my relationship to G Fuel energy formula. Use code HORSEGIRL. They said if I move enough product before my contract ends, they'll name a flavor after me. We also have a few other Halloween monsters running around. There are witches and vampire hunters and werewolves. Werewolves are dangerous because their bite can kill a vampire. But honestly, I hate the werewolves. Not a single good character is a werewolf. And as early as season 2, the world building starts to get extremely funny, at least to me, because it's always just whatever the plot calls for in that moment. Nothing is sacred, nothing is set in stone. And obviously, if you operate like that for like 8 seasons, things are going to start to get really sloppy. So let me just give you one example. I said that Elena is identical to Stefan and Damon's old vampire girlfriend. So why is that? Well, Elena is a magical creature called the doppelganger. What's a doppelganger? Well, it's a human that has no special powers but looks like Catherine. You'll notice I said Catherine and not someone. That's because Elena is the only doppelganger that we have. We don't know what it means. It's just a plot device so that Elena looks like their ex so that they're in love with her. But later seasons expand on the doppelganger thing entirely to create new ideas for the plot. Like there will be a ritual or a prophecy or something that means a new Halloween monster that's come to town needs Elena's blood. And then in season 2, they add the lore that Catherine herself was also a doppelganger of a different person. And remember when I said that Elena was the only doppelganger ever? Well, in season 4, they changed their mind. Yeah, it turns out that Stefan is also the doppelganger of an evil male witch.
Hello, my shadow self.
Yeah, I guess you can save money by just making your principal cast double up on roles. And then in season 5, we find out that the person that Elena and Catherine are doppelgangers of is Amara, and that Amara is actually the handmaiden of a new witch character that they've just written in that season. And then in the spin-off show, we find out that Elena and Catherine had another doppelganger in between them and Amara, whose name is Tatia. This adds nothing of value. It's just one of those things that happens when you've been out of ideas for 5 seasons straight.